What's up, everyone? My name is Pastor Ben, for those who don't know me, and today I'm going to be starting a new series doing reviews. Whether it's for books or movies or other media, I'm going to be going over things that relate to young adult ministry because that's what I do. I'm a young adult pastor, I work with young adults, that's my thing. I'm trying to learn more myself, and I thought it might be a good thing to do to actually go over the material that's out there talking about young adult ministry or young adults in general, sociological works, or things that would relate to young adult ministry. And the way I'm going to do these reviews is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to give an immediate, should you read this or not? Then I'll give some background and information on the author, the book itself, go over some of the contents, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and then wrap it up with some final thoughts. And today I'm going to be starting with this book by James Emery White titled Meet Generation Z. It's a pretty common book, at least in my circles. A lot of people seem to know it, but if you don't, it's definitely worth the read. So right away, there's my opinion on it. I think it's good to pick up. So right away, should you read it? I would say yes, if you are someone who works with young adults, whether you are a young adult leader, a young adult pastor, or if you're a parent or even a grandparent and you just want to know more about your kids or your grandkids, or if you're just curious about, our current culture and how young adults view things, how they perceive things, things that they go through and how they process, and really just understanding the younger generation. Though I would say if you are a Gen Zer, right, if you are a Zoomer, maybe don't pick this up. Now, this is coming from me as a millennial, because one of the things I hate is when people talk about millennials, because I am one. Maybe that's just a personal thing for me. I don't know if that's, a general idea for people in my generation, but it seems like whenever someone is talking about millennials, I have one of two responses. Either the things I'm hearing don't relate to me at all, and I'm like, well, this doesn't describe me at all. Why would I listen to this? Or I think I already know this, so why am I listening? Right? You're just describing me. That's not really useful. There's nothing to be gained here. Maybe that is personal. So that's why I say if you are a Zoomer, maybe don't pick this book up. But I mean, you can if you want. If you want to just know more about your demographic, I think that's fine. But other than that, I think this is certainly a worthwhile read. So I want to talk a little bit about the background here. So the author is a pastor himself, which I thought was pretty interesting because of the content of the book. I would have assumed he was a professor, like exclusively, like that was his main role, but he's actually a pastor of a church. So you do have that perspective coming into play. He talks a lot about the church. He talks a lot about how the younger generation is going to affect the church moving forward and how they perceive church to be and what the church should do, which is a pretty interesting take on it. But that doesn't mean that he is lackluster in the research side. Like, he definitely does his homework. James Emery James Emery White. That's how you say it. He definitely knows what he's talking about, and it shows in the writing. So it's pretty cool to have that unique perspective because he's not someone who's just talking about this, from behind a desk. He also incorporates some of his personal experiences and conversations and actually seeing these things at play. And the book itself is definitely research heavy. It is much more analytical. There's not going to be a lot of storytelling, though he does incorporate that a little bit, but it's more just talking about the data and the research that's out there to better understand Generation Z. And it's pretty clear that the purpose of the book is to help people understand the younger generation, understand where they're coming from, understanding their perspectives, their motivations, the things that they're experiencing, how they view the world, stuff like that. So it's pretty straightforward, again, what the purpose of the book is. You're not going to be confused at any point being like, what is this all about? Right from the beginning, it's very clear that the purpose of the book, just like the title says, Meet Generation Z. He's just explaining the demographic of Zoomers, which is very helpful because, as it's listed here, he's really bridging the gap between the older generations and the younger generations because there are significant differences. I would even say more so now than in previous generations. There is a major difference now between people who are senior citizens and people who are graduating high school, which currently is Generation Z. So this book is very helpful in sort of bridging that gap from the older generations understanding the younger generations. So I want to share a little bit about why I read this book. The main motivation for me reading this book was because I was becoming a young adult ministry leader. So I thought it would be useful to know this, even though, like I said before, I am a millennial. So a lot of the things I read in the book resonated with me because I am very close, age-wise and sort of experience-wise, to Zoomers. So there were a lot of similarities when I read the book, but it was still very useful for me. A lot of things I didn't know, some things I didn't really understand before reading the book anyways, or that I wasn't aware of. So it was very helpful. That's why I read it. But also, I read it because even though I am a young adult myself, I didn't want to assume that I knew everything when I entered into young adult ministry. I wanted to have a much more concrete and also a much more broad understanding of the demographic that I'd be working with. So that's why I picked up the book. So maybe you might find yourself in a similar situation, in which case it's certainly useful. Pick it up. You should read it. And now I want to briefly go over what the book covers. And it's very well laid out. There's two major sections. The first section introduces us to Generation Z. It goes over statistics. It goes over things like their religious affiliation, what sort of social media that they use and don't use. It talks about, their own personal goals, the things that they're experiencing, and really, in a more general sense, their worldview. So that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book is a bit more reflective. He talks about how Generation Z can, will, and is shaping the church moving forward. He talks about, what they have to offer, what they bring to the table, both positive and a little bit negative, though I don't think he overtly does that. You can sort of read between the lines, things that they bring that could adversely affect the church, but also, he talks about how the church can embrace and respond to Generation Z, how they can create space, how they can create ways for Generation Z to get connected and involved. So it's pretty neat in that regard, that it's not just straightforward, just research. All right, here's the data. He also, that second part of the book is more about, okay, but what do we do with this information, which I really appreciated. Some things that were good and bad about the book. So the good side, again, it is more research-based. It is more analytical. He doesn't spend a lot of time on fluff. It gets straight to the point, which I love. I'm not the type that really likes books that builds all their information around stories. I kind of get bored with that myself. But this one gets straight to the point. It is very useful for young adult ministry. I would say it's a pretty good entry book for people if you want to look into working with young adults in any capacity. I would say, start with this one because he does go over more basic foundational things, which is useful. It's a good starting point. Also, one thing I thought was great was the appendix in the back of the book. I think this book sort of undersells that point itself, but it's really useful. So, for example, there's 3 main sections, at least in the edition I have. I don't know if there's different editions. Mine just says it's a special edition. But anyways, the back of the book has 3 sections where he kind of has somewhat of a conversation with the reader, where he explores different topics in a way that is accessible and easy to follow for Zoomers. So the first section, he talks about gay marriage. The second section, he explores understanding the supernatural, which is something that Gen Zers do have an interest in generally. And the last section is it's kind of an apologetics. He talks about essentially proofs for the existence of God, or really evidences for the existence of God, which I thought was pretty interesting, though again, it is very entry level. So if you are someone who's really big into apologetics, you might not be all that interested in that particular section. But I did think it was pretty cool how it is a very practical part of the book, where he takes the demographic and research-based side of what he's doing and he integrates it into, okay, this is actually how it looks in practice when you're having these sort of conversations, and how Gen Zers would respond in these conversations, and how those would go. So that was pretty cool. I would say the one bad thing that I noticed from this book is that because it is research based, I feel like this is a flaw with any sort of research stuff, but it does lead to overgeneralizations. So for example, one of the things he talks about is the type of social media that Zoomers will gravitate towards and the things that they won't gravitate towards. So at one point he talks about how, Zoomers, they don't really use things like Twitter or Facebook as much. They really more use these social media platforms, which, I mean, obviously this is just an example, but I did think it was interesting when I brought up the social media uh, apps that he mentions in the book to my small group of young adults. They had no idea what I was talking about. Like, they weren't even familiar with it. So there are certainly generalizations that he makes. So I would say if you are going to read this, be cautious of that. Don't take this as 100% gospel truth in all scenarios, because it's not. Zoomers are a very diverse group. As are millennials, we tend to be very diverse in our views and in the things that we like, the things that we don't like. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to working with young adults, which this book tends to lean towards. It kind of assumes there is, more often than not, a one-size-fits-all approach, and I would say that's a negative side of this book. I think it's sort of flawed in that regard. But again, that's just an issue you're going to have with any research book. There's always going to be generalized, broad conclusions that are drawn, so you just have to be cautious of that. So overall, I would say that if you're looking for a well-researched, well-written book that talks about young adults, specifically Generation Z, this is a really good place to start. It's worth the read, worth picking up. Pick it up wherever you can. I'll link it in the description below, probably to Amazon or something. And it's certainly worth it. And as far as the score goes, I would score this 22 out of 26 letters of the alphabet. It does have its flaws. It's not perfect, like leading to overgeneralizations. And at some points, I wish he would give a little bit more insight. And then at other points, I wish he would not talk as much. But, that is what it is. It's not a perfect book, but it is a very solid book to get. So that's going to be my review of Meet Generation Z. And let me know what you thought of this. Did you agree with my analysis of this book? Yes or no? Leave your comments down below, because I would love to hear what you thought of this and what you'd like to see in the future. And if there is anything you would like me to review, whether it's a book or even if it's a podcast or a blog or a movie or a Sunday school material, whatever it is, reach out to me. Let me know what you'd like to see, what you'd like me to take a look at. Maybe a little bit more in-depth analysis if you want that, or maybe just a very simple yes or no. So thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.